The state of New York has now subpoenaed Michael Cohen on the heels of his guilty plea. The Associated Press was first to report that the subpoena is part of the state's investigation into the Trump Foundation. It comes after Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, claimed his client had information that federal and state investigators would like to know. The Attorney General of New York is currently suing the Trump Foundation, claiming Donald Trump illegally used his foundation to settle legal disputes, help his campaign for president, and pay for personal and business expenses. When the lawsuit was announced in June, the president vowed not to settle the case. The current investigation is being conducted by New York's tax department and could be referred to the Attorney General for prosecution. It's important to note that the president does not have the power to pardon in-state cases. Joining us now, investigative reporter for The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor, David Fahrenthold. David, you have new reporting on Michael Cohen using the president's secrets as leverage, including personally calling the New York Tax Department to see how he could help their probe into the Trump Foundation. What's he doing here? Is this ultimately trying to save himself in some way?
It's a good question. I think right now, immediately, he's trying to raise his profile as somebody who knows a lot about Donald Trump because Michael Cohen has a GoFundMe set up to get people to contribute to his legal expenses. So I think he's trying to demonstrate his value to a variety of legal probes, not just to the investigators, but also to the public. That's part of this. But also, the interesting thing about Michael Cohen is, Donald Trump had blurred the lines between his company and his family, his company and his charity, his company and his campaign. And Michael Cohen played this unusual role where he was on either side of all those blurred lines. He had a toe in every little piece of the Trump empire as it commingled. And so Michael Cohen didn't have a formal role in the Trump Foundation, but it's possible he knows a lot about how it worked. That's sort of the role that he played in Trump's life. He was involved in everything.
I'll tell you exactly what Michael Cohen is thinking and what he's going to be doing. And I spoke to Michael again yesterday. It's been reported that Michael, after the Putin press conference in Helsinki, put him over the edge. Now, he was moving in that direction, but I remember speaking to him right afterwards, and he really, this is genuine, was like, I know I've been getting there, but seeing this, something's got to be done for our country. Obviously, he's going to do things to protect himself. We've talked about it, as anybody would. But he's pissed. He is pissed. And, as far as the foundation goes, he knows all. As far as the meeting, with the Russian collusion at the hotel, he knows all. So beyond doing what's right for him and his family, he does have it. This is a guy who has spent think about, you've spent your life working for somebody, defending to somebody, and that very person you work for not only has turned on you, but you've really seen a light. Jesus, this is the guy I was working for. This is the guy I was putting my entire life and my entire trust behind. So he is not only doing things now to also protect himself. Donnie? I'm telling you, there is a sense of right and wrong, and sometimes you've got to hit your nose against the wall. But that is what's going on there.
Hey, Donnie, there was an amazing little snippet in the Wall Street Journal article about this last night. And I want to know if you could add to it. But essentially what it said was one of the compelling reasons that Michael Cohen decided to take the path that he's currently on was a conversation that he had with his father, who was a Holocaust survivor. His father essentially said to him, I didn't survive the Holocaust to have Donald Trump sully my name. And I want you to do the right thing. And, it really was a compelling moment, a rare look at the family drama that Michael Cohen's also dealing with. Can you talk a little bit about that father relationship and what that meant to him in this moment?
He didn't tell me about the father discussion, but I will tell you a conversation I had with him regarding his dad being a Holocaust survivor. When Michael first got arrested, the amount of texts he got and tweets he got about, you're the guy standing as they're putting Jews in the oven. You're the guy your dad's a Holocaust survivor. You're standing by, and that shook him to his core. He's like, wait a second, my dad's a Holocaust survivor. And I think that was one, and obviously it's a bridge along the way. But when he started getting the text, this was after Charlottesville, where he, at this point, he hadn't turned yet. And it was like that you're standing by and allowing this to happen. He was like, I'm not standing by. I am so offended. I am so shaken to my core. So these were all pieces of the puzzle. And, you know, if that conversation did happen with his father, because I know as far as his children and his family, like all of us, this is what gets to our core.
You know,
that
it very well might have, but I have a lot of problems with somebody wrapping themselves in the Holocaust in order to justify their own behaviors. Donald, he spent.
He wasn't.
This guy
No, he was
spent
not.
quite a bit.
He was
One
not.
second, Donnie. This guy spent quite a bit of time
he was not
lobbying the president in the press to pay his legal bills, threatening to talk to Mueller through the press, and then going to start a GoFundMe.
Saying
so
is that as a
his
Jew,
moral righteousness is not.
As a Jew,
I have questions.
No, he's not wrapping himself in the Holocaust. As a Jew and as a man, that when Charlottesville happened, and that basically people were attacking Michael. And just wait a second, you know, how can you stand by and let this? He was deeply, deeply moved and offended as anybody would be. It's not a matter of wrapping.
It's a late-breaking development.
I think the problem, Donnie, and I want to get back to David's reporting, I think the problem is that, you know, what has been revealed in the past few days to Michael Cohen himself pleading guilty to breaking the law repeatedly, to breaking the law for the president.
Correct.
So for him to, you know, all of a sudden see the light, it's a little far-fetched.
Well, we look through history of people who have done wrong, and they've paid the price, and you do see the light. And I do think he sees the world.
My point is, he knew all along that the president was crooked because he broke the law for him. Why does he need to watch Helsinki happen? I mean, you can just look. He can just look at the financial transactions for porn stars.
Because, like a lot of people, once again, like a lot of people, they'll go, okay, this is wrong. Yeah, we're paying this woman off, and that happens all the time, versus a president putting our world and our country at risk with a foreign. There are differences. We do have to draw distinctions between levels of wrong versus saying everything is wrong. That's just reality. And if I spoke to people out there, the average voter, the average person said, is there a difference between Trump paying off a porn star and Trump being in bed with Putin so visibly? I do think 90% of people would distinguish between those two, although they're both wrong.
David Fahrenthold, you have reporting that Michael Cohen is very concerned, especially because his wife has joint filings with him. Tell us more about that, as well as any potential ties to Russia.
Well, I think you've seen Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's attorney, talk in sort of vague terms about the things that Michael Cohen might know related to the Trump campaign in Russia. We don't quite know what that is yet. I haven't seen Lanny Davis sort of specify what Cohen knows. You're right, though, that Cohen was in a bind. I mean, just beyond whatever sort of moral things he may have been wrestling with, there was this very immediate legal problem, which is that the New York Attorney General had gone after sort of the taxi king of New York, a guy who was in the taxi business with Cohen. That case was bleeding over into Cohen's taxi investments. Cohen may have felt the threat there. Certainly, he felt the threat from federal prosecutors who were putting him under a lot of pressure in the last few months, both pressure on his wife and you know, pressure on him. So I think he may have felt legally like this was a time when he had to cut his losses. He may not have seen a way out of this legally other than to sort of plead guilty and perhaps cooperate in some other investigations.
Wow. David Fahrenthold, thank you very much for being on this morning, and thank you for your reporting. Still ahead, the president was up until after 1 o'clock this morning at the very least, tweeting. More on the legal pressure that's keeping him up at night ahead. Plus, we'll dig into the new issue of Time magazine, The President in Deep, as Bob Mueller closes in. Morning Joe is coming right back.
So I give myself an A+. I don't think any president has ever done what I've done in this short. We haven't even been 2 years. Biggest tax cuts in history, soon to be 2 unbelievable Supreme Court justices. I'm sure that Justice Kavanaugh will be approved. Justice Gorsuch has been a star. You look at all of the things we've done with regulations. The economy is the best it's ever been in history. The only thing I'm doing badly in is the press doesn't cover me fairly.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.